The journey to the draft is driven by AAA. AAA, roadside is their strong side. Make AAA a part of your game day today. AAA, go ahead.
With the 25th pick in the NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select.
You're listening to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.
Welcome to the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. I'm your host, Fran Duffy. We've got a really fun show today. A lot of things that we're going to cover. Not just the college football playoff preview. We'll hit that with Ben Fennell in Saturday Scouting. We've got top 10 positional recaps and previews for the 2020 draft with our friend Dane Brugler in Mr. Relevant. We've got some underclassmen news with Tony Pauline in Draft Buzz. We're going to talk about one of those underclassmen that just declared right before the show went to air, in Arizona State running back Ino Benjamin. That's going to be in Scouting Report. We've got a couple of questions from you on Twitter in Draft Mailbag. A ton to cover. Let's get started with Saturday Scouting.
It's time for Saturday Scouting.
All right, well, let's start things off here on Saturday Scouting. And Ben, welcome back to the show. You're back fresh from your trip to Memphis for the AAC title game. What were your overall thoughts?
It doesn't feel like I just left Memphis. It feels like I just left 15 straight weeks of college football.
True.
Now I'm finally taking that breath and saying what am I going to do with my weekend?
Hey, you got a couple weeks until your next game.
I don't know what to do. I'm just going to walk the streets, and just roam aimlessly.
Are you allowed to share publicly where you guys are heading?
Yeah, actually. So we're going to be doing the Citrus Bowl.
Nice.
January 1st, kicking off that fun day of action.
Yep.
Good matchup, Alabama, Michigan.
It's a hell of a matchup.
Yeah, two great historic programs. The first ever showdown between Nick Saban and Jim Harbaugh.
So there's a lot of storylines.
Should be some
there.
good TV with their emotions and reactions on the sideline, too, with
Right.
more animated coaches. So hopefully our director, Mike Roig, is making some thoughtful cuts and showing all the emotion on the sidelines.
Hopefully a lot of the juniors that are in that game carry through and will play in that game.
Yeah, Alabama hasn't not been in the playoff in quite some time.
They've never not been in the
So
playoff.
might be some business decisions for some of these seniors and juniors and kind of protecting themselves and making sure they stay healthy for the NFL.
All right, well, let's talk about the game you were at this weekend. Memphis versus Cincinnati. Memphis comes away with the AAC title, which means their only loss came against my Temple Owls here at Lincoln Financial Field. But your game ball from this game.
Yeah, it was a great game. Back and forth. Memphis won 29-24 in a very rare occurrence where they played back-to-back weeks.
Right.
It's only happened 4 times in the modern era of college football. Isn't that bizarre?
Period?
Yes.
Like ever? Wow.
Because conference championships, the extra game wasn't always a thing.
Right.
So you need that in order for it to happen, and then you just need that perfect storm. Their coaches actually called several NFL coaches to ask about what are some of the dynamics about replaying somebody.
Huh.
And most of the responses from the NFL coaches, don't overthink it. So it's kind
Really?
of funny that they were overthinking it, and
overthinking
the NFL's kind of comment back was, don't overthink it.
All right, so who overthought it in this game?
Well, it's tough to say. I mean, it was a back and forth game. It was,
Right.
it was a really fun game. But my game ball is going to go to Antonio Gibson, receiver out of Memphis. He got the MVP of the game, the award after as well. So no surprise there. 11 carries, 130 yards and a
Wow.
touchdown.
Okay.
Another 3 receptions for 32 yards and a touchdown.
Okay, so mostly carries on jet sweeps, I'm assuming? And
No,
things like
he's
that?
lined up in the backfield. They're giving
Really?
him inside zone, downhill, between the tackles. He's a really, really unique player when we're starting to talk about him as a prospect because he's 6'2", 220.
Right.
This isn't some small gadgety, I could play in the slot and get a handoff. He's a big receiver with a big frame on him, and he could run.
So is he a back or is he a receiver for the next level?
It's tough to say right now. And he's very much in that mold of a Jalen Hurd at Tennessee, transferred to Baylor, who was a running back at 6'3", 6'4", 220, and then turned to slot receiver at Baylor. Nobody knew what he was.
Give him a third-round pick of the
Cordero
49ers.
Patterson at University of Tennessee. You didn't know what he was. He was 6'3", 225, and he could run, he returned kicks, he could catch, he has long speed. Very intriguing receiver here, Antonio Gibson. He's got a great production this year, and when I break down, let me just find players that have 500 receiving yards, 300 rushing yards.
Okay.
Let me find some dual threat players, which
Yeah.
I love to do. Only 4 players in college football fit that metric. Interesting enough, 2 of them are from the University of Memphis, Kenneth Gainwell and Gibson.
Okay.
But when I start to look at the history of this metric, it's all small, dynamic slot players. the Dre Archers of the world, the Curtis Samuels of the world, Tavon Austins of the world, Tommy Lee Lewis, those style of players.
Right.
The fact that Antonio Gibson is in this conversation, Randall Cobbs of the world, Percy Harvins of the world, is very, very interesting.
Because of his size at 6'3",
Because
220.
his size and his ability and his long speed and the fact he can run like that with the ball in his hands and win down the field.
Right.
Very, very interesting prospect.
We haven't talked about him on the show, and I don't think a lot of people are talking about him, period.
No.
But see, he seems like he's got the profile of a guy that is kind of flying under the radar.
Yeah, and he's a JUCO transfer, so
Right.
he's a little bit behind the 8 ball. And from everything that I've heard about his upbringing was just had a little bit of trouble academically out of high school. Not a bad kid off the field or anything like
Yeah.
that. Just a little bit behind on grades, went with the JUCO route, ended up getting scooped up by Memphis and having a nice career down there.
No, it's certainly an interesting name to keep an eye on here moving forward. All
Yeah.
right, let's get to your one-play takeaway.
One play takeaway, I want to profile this senior corner, Chris Claybrooks.
Okay.
The week before, he had a kickoff return touchdown to open the game up. That drew some attention. And this
Got it.
week, he had an interception. He had a nice quarterback pressure on a cat blitz. But the one play takeaway was he forced a fumble running down the opposing quarterback about 60 yards.
Nice. Okay.
So I love seeing that hustle. I love seeing a player open up his speed, which normally you need a big play on the offense for a defender to say, oh, here we go, and go run him down.
Right.
Which he did, punched the ball out. Then I started digging into this kid. He walked on 2 years ago, and for summer walk-on tryouts, ran a 4.25.
That's it?
Yeah. So he might
Pretty
not.
impressive.
Yeah.
All right.
So he might not.
Is he
have
a big? What's his body type?
He's 6 foot, 180. So a little bit more of an
Okay.
upright, long corner
Right.
with really good speed. And
Yep.
I saw the ball skills with the interception. I saw some toughness with blitzing. I saw the effort running this guy down, down the field.
Sure.
That in combination with the kickoff return, and then the verified 4.25 on campus there, I'm intrigued.
All right.
And he's a player I really don't know much about, but he had to step up this week because one of their veteran corners, TJ Carter, did not play.
There's a guy we talked about last week.
Exactly.
Yep. Okay.
So I was really impressed with Claybrooks.
Interesting. All right. Well, let's get to a guy that really looked the part in person. Who impressed you during pregame warm-ups when you're down there on the field?
So this is actually a Shrine Bowl invitee acceptance as well. The running back Patrick Taylor Jr.
Got it.
At the University of Memphis. He's just under 6'3", 225. He's a big, big running back. He looks like that Derrick Henry, Bo Scarborough, Jaquez Patrick out of Florida State last year, the year before. They don't look like running backs. They look like that outside linebacker mold
right.
where, you just think they're going to go blitz a quarterback. But he's actually a running back, really good between the tackles runner with some good power and some good finish. Not sure he has any playmaking ability to get himself out of trouble or, the real home run speed. But somebody I think could maybe be a day 3 pick or an undrafted and work their way onto the team through special teams and, the back of the roster.
Interesting. Yeah. So I've said this before. He was a guy that both Darrell Henderson and Tony Pollard brought up to me in February at the Combine.
And just to say, his dynamics at the University of Memphis did him no favors. He was behind Henderson and Pollard.
Yep.
He shows up this year, ready, senior, and
Yep.
all of a sudden this
Gets hurt.
freshman, Kenneth Gainwell, is like, who is this kid? He's
Yep.
the most dynamic player on the team, and you couldn't take touches away from Gainwell.
That was the
He was
problem.
too explosive.
Yep.
So it was a bit of a circumstance thing that Taylor, who had high expectations coming into this year,
And he was successful early on and then got
no
hurt.
question. Yeah, he got hurt, and
Yep.
then Gainwell stole the
That was
show.
it. Yep.
And there were high expectations for him. He was pretty much on every watch list.
Yep.
Being a senior and just that veteran presence, people thought this was going to be his year. And then that young stud kind of stole the thunder.
Oh, well, let's talk about Gainwell because he's your down-the-road freak
No
show.
question. This was an easy one. He didn't really have the best game. He didn't have those game-breaking plays I expected in that Tony Pollard role, running the ball, also lined up in the slot. But he did have a really nice back shoulder catch down the field late in the fourth quarter that I said, there it is.
Yep.
There's him lined up in the slot. There's him making a receiver catch down the field. Tons of spin moves, too. This guy loves to hit that circle button on the PlayStation controller and juke defenders and spin move off of them. So really fun player to watch, and down the road, just note his name.
Interesting. All right. Well, let me ask you, too, before we move on from this game. There's one guy from that game that is going to the Senior Bowl, and that's Cincinnati tight end Josiah DeGuara.
Oh, right, yeah.
Did he stand out to you at all in this game?
No, not particularly. They try to get him in space at times. He has good hands. Seems like a decent athlete, just not dynamic with the ball in his hands. I don't think he has that extra gear to really threaten linebackers and safeties vertically. He's going to make some tough catches for you. He's at QB's best friend, maybe more of a possession receiver, possession tight end. I just don't see enough juice and athletic upside.
All right, well, let's get to some of my takeaways from the weekend. Started for me Friday night, and I had eyes on that Pac-12 title. Just kind of disappointing because, I had watched a lot of Oregon this year, certainly one of their best games. And honestly, my game ball really quickly is going to that offensive line. Penny Sewell at left tackle, Shane Lemieux, Jake Hansen at center, the right guard, Dallas Warmack, the right tackle, Calvin Throckmorton. That O-line controlled this game against a great Utah front. And also, I want to give a nod to that coaching staff because their game plan to really negate the rush from that Utah defensive front, I thought was outstanding. Herbert was on the move. They worked in the screen game. Run game was working really well. Play action worked really well. They kept that defense on their toes, really did not allow them to get into any kind of rhythm defensively up front. So a big nod there. But so often the broadcast crew, they would show these replays and you get to see, oh, here's Penny Sewell matched up on Bradley and I. Here's Jake Hansen and Warmack matched up on Lakey Fotu. All right, how are they going to match up with Pennicini? Like watching all these matchups as they would play. Because, I've said this in the past. When I'm watching games on Friday and Saturday, very, very rarely am I watching them with like an eye towards like the NFL draft. I'm just kind of letting the game wash over me and trying to enjoy it as a fan.
And that's how you should watch TV. Yeah,
exactly. So I'm typically not looking, but when they show the replays, then I'll usually like, all right, let me pick one thing here to kind of look at. And my eyes always went to the trenches. To me, the offensive line was the hero of this game.
And just full disclosure on the way I talk about the games I go to.
Yes.
I have privileged access in the truck. I'm watching the All-22, the Sky Cam, the high end zone, so I'm able to take a deeper dive into these players as opposed to just watching what we put on the TV as a broadcast crew.
Exactly. So, to me, obviously, look, Oregon, they came out, they played arguably one of their best games of the year, especially against quality
I felt the big players stepped up in the game.
Yeah.
Troy Dye had one of his better games. The young freshman Kevon Thibodeau showed out.
Dude, he was my freak show for the
Obviously
week.
A coming out game for him on a national spotlight. Yes. Oregon doesn't play in front of a national audience too often, but I just felt like the big names made the big plays for him, and that's what you need for a recipe to be a veteran Utah team.
So the left tackle for Utah, Darren Paulo, I believe he's going to the Shrine game. I actually watched him a few weeks ago. Got obliterated by Thibodeau.
Right.
I mean, six hurries, 2.5 sacks in the day. He was dominant in this game. But you mentioned, Troy Dye, Johnny Johnson, the receiver for Oregon, made plays. I thought Herbert was solid, not great, but was solid.
He did enough.
Especially against that defense. Like that's all you can ask for. I thought that was just a really impressive performance overall by Oregon and Utah. You would argue that this was probably the biggest game in the history of that program. I don't know if it was too big for them or what, but that was the worst that I had seen them. Even the game that they had lost to USC, I thought that they at least were playing with that urgency and like that play personality. They just never really looked like themselves in this
I was
game.
Disappointed with the front seven defensively for Utah. I thought it would be more of a battle. I thought Oregon really dominated. Utah's offense was still pretty fun to watch.
Yeah.
I thought Tyler Huntley really, hung in there and tried to battle. Zach Moss had a couple nice plays and showing off his contact balance and trying to get some extra yards. Just really limited on the outside. Utah. It's kind of the Utah team you expect. They're going to be a trench team and try to beat you up and play defense. But that quarterback is a really good player that I don't think gets enough credit.
No, I agree. All right, well, let's get to the college football playoff preview because the college football playoff rankings came out on Sunday, so we know what the matchups are going to be now. The discussion, the projections are all over. You have the number 1 seed, LSU, number 2 seed, Ohio State, number 3 seed, Clemson, number 4 seed, Oklahoma. So I kind of thought, all right, everyone this week is going to be talking about the playoff and predictions and reacting to what we saw this weekend. So here's my thought. Gave you a little bit of homework. I said, here are 6 categories. Quarterbacks, run game, pass catchers on offense, defensively, the pass rush, run defense, and secondary. Let's rank the 4 playoff teams in each of these categories, and at the end, we can kind of see how we feel about the group as a whole, and that can kind of be an interesting way to just kind of talk about the playoff moving forward. So let's start with quarterback, and this isn't necessarily with an eye towards the NFL draft. It's how they're playing right now in college and the execution we're seeing. How do you rank this playoff group in terms of quarterback play?
Yeah, and just full disclosure, I'm not going to give you a symposium on every position for every category here, but right now, the snapshot right now at quarterback play, Joe Burrow way out in front, clear Heisman, winner right now. But the tough choice was between Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. I think Trevor Lawrence is playing as well as he ever has right now.
I'm going to be. I actually kind of thought that you would have Lawrence at 1 after seeing him.
He's playing really good right now, and he struggled to start the year, and now he's kind of coming on. And it's tough to say he's better than Justin Fields because Justin Fields was 42 touchdowns, one interception, some ridiculous statistics and production for his first time being on the field, really. So by default, I put in Jalen Hurts as number 4 there. But I just think Trevor Lawrence right now is playing some of his best ball. He just really hasn't had the stage to show it. The ACC isn't as competitive this year. The ACC championship really wasn't a competitive game. He's looking forward to this playoff these 2 games here. Hopefully he gets 2 games to really show that, what he's developed as a sophomore.
Yeah, I actually have the same exact ranking. Joe Burrow at 1, Trevor Lawrence at 2, Justin Fields at 3, Jalen Hurts at 4. All right, let's go to the run game. So the way I kind of set this up for you was not just the running backs, but also the O-line. What do we see from the run game? How do you rank these 4 teams?
Well, I go Oklahoma first, actually, because I think it's such a misconception about Lincoln Riley, spread, throw the ball, big plays. This offense is built through the trenches. And they started the season as the most inexperienced offensive line after turning over all those guys to the NFL, the Orlando Browns and Bobby Evans and whoever else they sent to the NFL. But that's such a run game focused team, the RPOs, getting, who's that running back out there in Oklahoma?
Kennedy McCoy.
Yeah, Kennedy McCoy involved really is the basis of their offense. So I think that's the most important, and that's some of the best play I think you'll get in this playoff is from Oklahoma's offense and the design of the stuff in the trenches as well. Very confusing run game as well with the quarterback runs, a lot of the RPOs, the pop passes, really tough reads. Then I'll go Ohio State. I really like J.K. Dobbins as a runner. Clemson, veteran offensive line. Travis Etienne, obviously the home run speed, not much involvement in the pass game. And then it's just ho-hum LSU there, who I think their offensive line's incredibly underrated. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who I compared to Brian Westbrook earlier in the week, that kind of gives me some dual threat vibes there. Nothing to take away Ohio State, Clemson, LSU, just kind of, how I felt like putting the pecking order.
So I kind of went about this in a little bit different thought process because you're exactly right. With Oklahoma, schematically, I think they offer the most variety and had the most to prepare for.
And I also did, in a sense, I think that's the most important to that team as well.
I mean, without question, with the way that they have to play. That is, it's kind of talking about like the Ravens. Like, you got to take away the run game when you're talking about playing the Baltimore Ravens. I think you feel that way about Oklahoma. I just looked at this and I said, from a personnel standpoint, I look at Clemson. I see Travis Etienne, his ability not just to hit it between the tackles, but his home run speed. You mentioned that veteran offensive line. You got Ankrum at right tackle and Simpson. You got 2 other seniors there in the starting lineup as well. I looked at them and I said, to me, that's the run game. That's number 1 for me. I agreed with Ohio State at number 2. I have Oklahoma at 3. Mainly because, I think when you look at that offensive line, you mentioned that turnover, all those guys that went to the NFL last year. Look, all these guys, they're not first-year starters anymore. At this point, you're being relied on to be the guy. Creed Humphrey, the center, was the only returning starter for that group this year. But, coming into the playoff, that's a group that's not overly seasoned. Kennedy McCoy's still very young. His numbers have been okay this year, but I think when you look at Jalen Hurts, he was second in the Big 12 in rushing this year. 97 yards per game on the ground. Kennedy Brooks, Ramondre Stevenson, sure, like guys that have talent, but to me, that knocked them down to 3 for me, and I agreed. I had LSU at number 4. All right, let's go to the pass catchers. How do you kind of rank this?
Man, this is a tough group,
this
right?
Is very tough.
So I'm actually going to go backwards here. We're going to put Oklahoma at 4. I think CeeDee Lamb is really the only major threat. Grant Calcaterra, unfortunately, retired from the game. I don't think Rambo and Hazelwood are there yet, although they're really talented players.
That's how I see it as well.
But the collective nature of the offense, RPO based, like we were just saying, very run game, pop pass, RPO stuff. So it's not asking the receivers to do a whole lot in that offense.
And CeeDee Lamb may be the number 1 receiver drafted.
No question. But we're trying to give a snapshot of the collective group.
Yes.
Number 3, I'll go Ohio State. I love KJ Hill. Huge KJ Hill fan. I think Olave is one of the more intriguing sophomores or freshmen or whatever he is. I know he's ineligible.
He's a sophomore.
Now it's just picking between LSU and Clemson. Let's just go through the 2 duos pretty much. You got Clemson, T. Higgins, Justin Ross. I know they have Amari Rodgers as well, but let's just go the top 2. LSU, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase. I'm going with the LSU duo as number 1 because I think they get themselves open. These guys are good route runners with good speed, good hands, good after the catch. Ross and Higgins are more catch point guys. They're more long, lean, playing above the rim, excellent body control, excellent tracking ability. but they're not guys that are going to stop on a dime and carve you up on a slant.
Right.
Which gives me a little bit of pause, especially if translating to the next level, which we could talk about down the road. But Justin Jefferson in his slot role really reminds me of Keenan Allen and Jamar Chase, one of the more electric sophomore receivers in the country here. Will probably be wide receiver 1 next year in the 2021 NFL draft. But these two guys, I feel like, have a much more diverse and deeper skill set.
Yeah, I actually went with the same exact order. LSU at 1, Clemson at 2, Ohio State at 3, Oklahoma at 4. All right, let's go to the defensive side now. Let's go to the pass rush. Which of these teams has the top pass rush in your mind?
Well, you have the best pass rusher, the best player in the country. You get the best pass rush group. That's Ohio State, Chase Young, and kind of an underrated interior group that a lot of people don't know about.
Devon Hamilton.
No question. I think Chase Young, and I don't mean this in a negative, kind of steals sacks from other players. Sometimes another end gets there, and it's like, he beat me to it. Whether it's I can't think of the other stud players they have up there. They had a couple other young, 5-star recruits and stuff that they've moved around.
Yep.
Cornell, I think, is one of the kids' name.
Yep.
I'm blanking on some of the other ones. But then we'll go to Clemson. They have Xavier Thomas, another young, exciting pass rusher there.
True sophomore.
Yep. Still a little bit young on the D-line there with the turnover to the NFL, losing Dexter Lawrence, Christian Wilkins, those guys. Then LSU, I think Clavion Chason's a really good player. Just kind of goes quiet from time to time. And I think they have a really good interior as well with Rashard Lawrence and Fehoko as well, the Texas Tech transfer. And then Oklahoma, I'm a little concerned. They don't really have the name power.
They don't.
They don't have the playmaking ability. They have Neville Gallimore in there with a good first step. Occasionally they'll rush Kenneth Murray as well.
Yep.
Just don't really have the playmaking power.
Yeah, Ronnie Perkins is a junior edge rusher, had 6 sacks this year. He's really kind of their only source of juice, I would say, off the edge.
Right.
So I had them at number 4. It was tough for me going Clemson and LSU. I actually went LSU ahead of Clemson just because I feel like you look at some of the upperclassmen there, with a Rashard Lawrence, with a Chase on, even though he was been banged up, I think you got a little bit more experience there. Clemson, a lot of young talent. You mentioned Xavier Thomas. They've had some other young defensive linemen that were named to the All-ACC team, even as true freshmen. So they have some young players. They're just not overly experienced. So I went with LSU with the nod over Clemson in the pass rush. All right, let's go to run defense. When you look at the front 7 for these groups and the ability to stop the run, who stands out to you most?
When was the last time LSU played Oklahoma? I think that was Nick Saban's national championship at LSU. He beat the Jason White Oklahoma team, but just trying to give a snapshot of when they've even played.
Yeah.
But run defense, I'm going to go Ohio State number 1. Really strong front 7 group.
Yep.
Typically in a base defense as well. So that means they're going to have 3 linebackers on the field most of the time. Pete Warner is a good kind of hybrid player that likes to play out in space as well. I really like LSU's front 7. I like their linebackers and Patrick Queen. Oklahoma, Kenneth Murray, I think, is one of the more physical, imposing presence in the front 7 in college football. And then Clemson, I think they're kind of an average group in the front 7. They really need their safeties to come down, Isaiah Simmons and Tanner Muse, to kind of make plays and be those extra hats in the run game there. I just think their linebackers are kind of average right now, and the guys in front of them really haven't been on the field a whole lot. So occasionally their run fits are a little bit off and still trying to find their way and playing in coordination with the linebackers behind them.
So I went Ohio State 1 for all the reasons you mentioned. Malik Harrison, certainly a name. Let's keep an eye on. We'll talk about him in a little bit here. I went with Clemson number 2, and I went with them because I think schematically, when you talk about those safeties in the back end, I think they offer a lot in terms of being able to come down. They're very active, lots of stunts and run blitzes up front. I think that it's a very active group. It is a young group, though, overall.
And for everything we're saying about them being young in the front 7, the safeties are pretty experienced, whether it's Kavon Wallace, Tanner Muse, Isaiah Simmons. Those guys have played a lot of football for them, and they're very much involved in the run game.
Exactly.
So I can get down with you there.
Yep. So then I went with LSU at 3 and Oklahoma at 4. I think Oklahoma, certainly with Neville Gallimore, Kenneth Murray, they've got some of that name recognition. I just look at LSU. They've got that stout nose tackle and Fehoko inside. Rashard Lawrence is such a violent run player. Gallimore, I think, has that strength. He's a little bit more of a penetrator. And I still need to watch Murray, but I thought LSU slight edge for me in that
And
department.
one thing I heard a couple weeks ago, Rashard Lawrence and Fehoko, like ships in the night, kind of pass each other in the eyes of scouts. Fehoko has really kind of ascended his stock this year. And Rashard Lawrence had high expectations coming into his junior season.
Right.
Really kind of left a flat year last year. Came back for a senior campaign. I'm pretty sure he's a senior, right?
He is a senior,
Rashard Lawrence. and just really hasn't ascended his game. I think we were excited after that freshman and sophomore campaign and just never really took off. I think Fehoko has really kind of ascended his game. So interested to see where they end up on the pecking order once it's all said and done.
All right, so let's do the last one here. Secondary play. And this was a really fun one to kind of think through. How do you rank these groups?
So I'm going to go LSU number 1.
Okay.
All right, so they have the true freshman prodigy, Derek Stingley, holding down the right corner spot. You got Christian Fulton on the other side, Kerry Vincent, the track star at free safety, and then Grant Delpit, who's had kind of a disappointing year considering his expectations, but a veteran group aside from that true freshman who looks like he was made in a lab somewhere. But very impressive group. And it was really tough to decide between LSU and Ohio State because Ohio State, Jeffrey Okudah, Sean Wade, cornerback 1, cornerback 2 in the 2017 class. Ohio State got both of them. Great to see them both on the field with Damon Arnett, senior presence as well. You have Jordan Fuller on the back end, I believe, still. I don't know how long he's been at Ohio State, but 7 years. Yeah, an impressive group, a long group. Both Wade and Okudah are big defensive backs, and that's a reason why they can play base. Is these corners, these defensive backs, these safeties will stick their nose in on the run game. They're very technically sound. They're well coached, and they're not liabilities in any phase of the game. Then we'll go to Clemson. Like we were saying, I'm really impressed with the safeties: Kavon Wallace, Simmons, Muse, AJ Terrell at the cornerback spots. A guy that's been on the field quite a bit. And then Oklahoma, again, not really a lot of names on that back end. I like that kid Motley at the one corner spot. Had a good start to the season, a little bit inconsistent, has trouble finding the ball down the field, has made some big plays to get you excited about. But you thought this was going to be the year that Oklahoma had a dominant defensive presence, and it started to turn that way the first couple weeks. And then they reverted back to kind of that Big 12-ish style of being a little bit loose and playing out in space there in the Big 12. So it's just tough to nothing against Oklahoma in the pass rush and the secondary play, but when you look at LSU, Ohio State, Clemson, it's not so bad being number 4.
I mean, Oklahoma has had 7 picks this year. Still the best pass defense in terms of numbers in the Big 12.
No question.
But they're just not getting the turnovers and the big plays that they would want on the back end. So I had them at number 4. You had LSU at 1. I had them at 3, mainly because I feel like that group as a whole underperforming just a little bit when you look at Delpit. Fulton hasn't been great from the start to finish this year. I think Vincent, they've all got tools, and we're not talking about them as prospects, just in terms of execution. You look at some of these games this year, LSU's given up a lot of yards, yards. I kind of look at LSU and say, okay, if they get into a shootout with an Ohio State, they get into a shootout with a Clemson, it's going to be a shootout. Like, I don't think they've got that stopping power on the back end.
And the tool set conversation is interesting because we've talked about this a little bit off camera as well. We like Christian Fulton. He looks like a press corner.
Right.
We think he's more suited to be an off corner. And kind of struggles in press and turning and running. And then Kerry Vincent, track speed, might be one of the fastest players in college football. I'm not so sure he's that good at football.
Right.
Dynamic athlete, very fast. Where does he play at the next level? Is he a corner? Can he play nickel? Is he a free safety? Positional fit, skill set, talented players, but they have some holes in their game.
Yeah, Stingley certainly seems like he's the real deal.
No question. Yeah, he's impressive.
So I went Clemson 2, and I went Ohio State 3 for all the reasons you mentioned. Ohio State full of some studs there on the back end. All right, so we're done the group. Now I figured let's just kind of add it up, and this is kind of the fun part is stacking it up. You have no idea how this went.
No, I didn't bring the calculator.
No, so I did that calculation for you. So just off your scores.
Yep.
All right, and so I'm going to do this golf style. The highest score is the worst team.
Okay.
Oklahoma 20 points. They're in 4th place for you.
Okay.
Clemson 16 points. They're in 3rd place. Then you had a tie at number 1 with LSU and Ohio State at 12.
Interesting.
All right, so I did mine separately. Oklahoma at 4th with 23 points. LSU 3rd with 14 points. Clemson 2nd place with 12. Ohio State led the way for me with 11. Then I said, all right, I'll total these up and see how we felt about them as a group. Oklahoma at 4, Clemson at 3, LSU at 2, Ohio State at 1.
Interesting.
So we'll see how this plays out.
That's kind of a fun little exercise.
There's an exercise, yeah. So we'll
Who do you want to see
here
in the championship game?
Whew.
Just off the cuff. We didn't talk about this at all.
Yeah, we haven't talked about this. LSU, from a storyline standpoint, seeing Joe Burrow go up against Ohio State is certainly interesting. But I find it tough to root against Dabo and Trevor Lawrence.
I know.
Guys.
I
really
want
like
to see the
Clemson
Joe
a lot.
Burrow, Trevor Lawrence showdown.
Yes.
But I really want to see LSU's offense against Ohio State's defense.
Yes.
I want to see a Chase Young style player giving Joe Burrow trouble. I want to see Okudah and Sean Wade try to cover Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase.
Chase Young back there.
No question.
Yep.
I think there's a lot of dynamic kind of matchups in that game. I think that'd be a really fun championship game.
Yeah, hey, we'll dive into the matchups, these individual matchups, as we get a little bit closer. But no, I thought that was an interesting exercise. All right, let's get into the rest of this. And real quick, we have a question on Twitter from Vincent Russo. I had a question I wanted to pitch to you and not say for Draft Mailbag because you've seen these two guys live. The question from Vincent is, can you guys compare and contrast CeeDee Lamb, the star wide receiver from Oklahoma, against T. Higgins, the star wide receiver for Clemson?
Interesting.
So you've seen both guys live.
Yep.
How do you kind of compare and contrast those two players?
So really quickly, body type wise, they're about the same definition.
Okay.
CeeDee Lamb's a little bit shorter. He's about 6'2". I think T. Higgins is a little bit more in the 6'4" range, but both pretty skinny, long legs, not very filled out or, rocked up or anything like that. But just off the cuff, CeeDee Lamb, sudden. Very, very sudden in everything that he does. Sudden in his releases, sudden in getting in and out of his breaks, sudden with the ball in his hands after the catch. He has long speed and short area quickness to make you miss in a phone booth.
Yep.
T. Higgins is long, long, long. Really good catch adjustments, really good tracking ability. But he's a guy that I think wants that defensive back on his hip. He wants to feel where he is and figure out how to box you out, how to high point you, and then hopefully be an athlete in space. I think that's the kind of difference. I don't think T. Higgins is as sudden as CeeDee Lamb. I don't think T. Higgins is as dynamic of a route runner. But can T. Higgins make more dynamic catches for you? Yes. Does he have a bigger catch radius for you? Yes. Can he track the ball better? I'll say yes. So I think that's the kind of difference in the players, and that CeeDee Lamb will get himself open, much more sudden and explosive with the ball in his hands, but a little bit more limited at the catch point. He's about 6'2", might come down to 190 pounds when it's all said and done.
Interesting.
He could get bumped off just a little bit in his routes and his stems. He could get bumped off just a little bit at the catch point. T. Higgins, just a little bit of a bigger presence, longer arms, a bit more of a dog at the catch point. And he leaves a little bit more to be desired with the ball in his hands after the catch.
Yep.
We've seen some of the plays of CeeDee Lamb.
No question.
One of the more electric players in college football. So just my elevator speech on both of them there.
No, that was I figured, as soon as I saw this question, let me put this into Saturday Scouting for Ben. So Vince, appreciate the question. And if you guys ever have any questions, you can go, whether you ask one of us on Twitter, we can answer it there or here on the show. But the best way is to go into Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and leave us a question there in the comments section. We'll answer it here on the show. All right, let's wrap this up, Ben. We've got a handful of new Senior Bowl announcements. We've got a bunch of underclassmen coming as well. But let's do the Senior Bowl announcements here. A couple receivers from the SEC. Van Jefferson, who was initially announced for the Shrine game, but will be going to Mobile instead.
I feel like every Florida receiver has gotten some invitation to a post game.
Well, they were like 6 of them going to the
Trayvon
Shrine.
Grimes
but now
and Freddie Swain.
Yep,
and
Hammond is going to the Shrine.
Right.
They're all going everywhere. But Jefferson going now to the Senior Bowl. Juwan Jennings, the Tennessee wide receiver, also going to the Senior Bowl.
Yo,
What do
give
you think
me
about
Juwan
these two
Jennings
guys?
on my team. I
Yeah?
want this guy on my team.
Why?
He is an absolute dog. He's a dog after the catch. He's a dog blocking. He's a dog at the catch point. Strong hands. Reminds me a little bit of Brandon Marshall and just being very aggressive with his hands, good in the red zone. There was an SEC film room last summer on SEC Network where he was breaking down some of his blocking and how just aggressive he was and how much he loved to block. Just hearing that just kind of makes a light bulb go off in my head. I want that guy on my football team.
Yeah, different kind of player than Jefferson for sure.
Yeah, Van Jefferson, Ole Miss transfer,
Yep.
highly touted recruit, son of Sean Jefferson, the former Ohio State receiver, NFL receiver, now a receiver coach, I think with the Titans or somebody, or the Detroit Lions. Really intriguing player that's had a bit of quarterback issues at Ole Miss, had a rotating, quarterback stable at Florida with Freddie,
Crowded room. Yep.
Felipe Franks and Del Rio, and then you got the Kyle Trask and then Emory Jones, and it's tough to evaluate receivers when you have all those different quarterbacks in
Yep.
there. But he's a talented kid. Go put his Vanderbilt tape on last year.
Right.
Carved up Juwan Williams
Yep.
on a slant and then took it to the house if you need a little snapshot against an NFL-style corner.
Yeah, he's a guy that I watched him at Ole Miss it was the summer going into last year, and that's when he was there. So this was 2017.
Right.
So that was he was there with Metcalf and AJ Brown and that whole group. I'm watching him. height and speed are there. I wanted to see a little bit more nuance from him in terms of his route running and his releases, which I was a little bit surprised by, considering he's the son of a coach. But a guy that, when you watch him on TV, you see the highlights, you're like, all right, man, I think it looks like he had gotten a little bit better in some of those areas. So I'm excited to do more.
Reminds me a little bit of like a Devontae Adams out of Fresno State.
Okay, yeah, I can see that.
Except Devontae was absolutely force-fed the ball from Derek Carr.
Right.
You got to see him in many more reps than Van Jefferson, which, like we just listed before, they had Trayvon Grimes and Freddie Swain, and now they have an exciting tight end and that stable running backs. They were spreading the ball at Florida. Sometimes he go quiet for a couple games.
All right, let's go to another player that you've seen live, and that's Michigan tight end Sean McKeon. I just watched him this morning, actually. 6'5", just under 250 pounds. Big kid. He was your off the bus guy when you saw Michigan earlier this year because of what you saw from him in person.
Yeah, he's just a good-looking kid. He kind of reminded me a little bit of Nick Van Eck coming out of Ohio State a couple years ago. Carved out a nice role at the Seahawks. I'm not sure where he is right now, but not really featured, the tight end position, not really featured in Michigan's offense. You don't get to see him, running down the seams or isolated outside the numbers. But, he's got good hands. He's a good red zone target, can make all the catches off of play action and whatnot. And I think he's an adequate blocker at the point of attack.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a contributor in the run game for
he's
sure.
kind of just like a B minus across the board, which typically can get you a roster spot. I don't know if you're draftable, but you could typically work your way into a team through special teams, and everybody's looking for that third tight end to not be a liability. Can you catch for us? Can you block for us? We don't need you to be exceptional. Just survive.
I kind of feel like he's gonna stick it in the league. All right, let's take the two Washington offensive linemen. I'm not sure how much work you've done on these two guys, with the left tackle Trey Adams and the center Nick Harris.
I haven't done the center yet, and I know he's really gotten a lot of buzz lately. And Trey Adams, I think I did 2 years ago.
Right. Okay.
I think I actually did the game he got hurt. It was the Fiesta Bowl against Penn State, the final game of the season in 2017. And really haven't seen him since he missed the season. And then I'm watching Caleb McGarry, and so I don't have a whole lot from this past season on the University of Washington. I didn't get to any of their games in person.
So Adams, 6'8", 334, big, tough. He's strong. He's got a really strong anchor. The medical is going to be the big thing there. I mean, you're talking about knee injury, back injury. I mean, that's two. When you're talking about a big guy, that's two things you don't typically want to mess with. I don't say he's got great feet. I think that's probably one of the knocks on him. But overall, big, strong, physical guy. Long-time starter there for the Huskies. So certainly someone to keep an eye on. And then the center, Nick Harris. You mentioned he's getting some buzz. He's 6'1", a little over 300, so he's on the shorter side. He's a little bit of squatty, but this kid is violent. He gets after people. He's got really, really heavy hands. He's got guard center versatility. He started at both guard spots. Now as a 2-year starter at center, does a great job getting up to the second level for blocks. He doesn't have great length, and his hands are a little bit all over the place, but from a play personality standpoint, the way he plays the position, he really reminds me of like the Pounceys. Like that's kind of like the kind of player he is in the trenches there for Washington.
All right, you get Biadasz, Cole Cabral, Nick Harris right now. Who are you taking?
So I actually haven't studied Biadasz yet, or however you pronounce his name for Wisconsin. I haven't studied him yet. I think I take this guy over Cabral.
Okay.
And I like Cole Cabral from Arizona State.
Yeah,
I like Cole Cabral. I think I take him over him.
Okay.
But Harris is a really good player. I'm excited to get to study a little bit more of him.
And the other interesting thing, Trey Adams.
Right.
If he stayed completely healthy through his college career, he's probably a top 10 pick in last year's draft.
Correct. Yes.
Just to give the snapshot and the perspective of kind of what he's dealt with and the expectations and his level of play, and really what the injury bug can do for your stock.
No question.
Yeah.
All right, so from two Washington kids to two Alabama kids defensively. Anthony Jennings, the outside linebacker for the Tide, and then the defensive lineman Raekwon Davis, both guys getting the call to the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, Jennings is a good player. He's more of a Sam linebacker than an edge player. More in that mold of like a Ryan Anderson a couple years ago.
Yep,
and just a ho-hum. I'm going to set the edge. We're going to stack blocks. I'm going to chase plays out to the numbers. Not a whole lot of juice in rushing the passer. He's not going to have those speed rushes where you're like, whoa, look at him turn the corner. Look at the flexibility. He's a really good football player that you don't have to take off the field. Doesn't have those exceptional traits in the upside. I don't know why I went back to Ryan Anderson. We go right back to Christian Miller last year.
Yep. Right.
Christian Miller, number 47.
Christian
was
Miller,
that him?
yeah, that's him.
Same kind of player. And
Yeah.
that Sam linebacker, not really anything exceptional with the pass rush. Just a good player that, isn't a liability against the run.
Yeah, the big question for Jennings is going to be that athletic upside.
Yeah.
Does he have the ability where, we don't want to take him off the field, but does he have the ability? Is he going to be a liability if he's left out there?
Does he have enough to change the game and make impact plays, on third and medium, third and long? And I think he also had an injury throughout his career at Alabama. So just want to make sure that's all taken care of.
All right, so Raekwon Davis is a defensive end in their 3-4 scheme.
Yep.
Lines up inside, outside, but 6'7", over 315 pounds, long. He's strong. He's got power. Not a polished pass rusher. The production's been up and down. You go back to 3 seasons ago, production was great. I think he had 7.5, 8 sacks. Has not been. I think he's had 3 sacks combined since that point. So the production's been a little bit up and down, but upside through the roof.
Yeah, no question. He's built different than all those other Alabama trench players, the Jerron Reeds, Ashawn Robinsons, Dalvin Tomlinson. He's much, much longer. Long arms, long frame, long torso. I'm not sure who Jim Nagy's going to get to block all these trench players and down in Mobile. They're a little bit behind on the guards and centers.
Right.
Just picked up Nick Harris this week, but you got Derek Browns of the world and
Javon Kinlaw,
Gallimore, and the Utah kid, and
Leke Fotus. They got the 2 North Carolina kids from North Carolina and NC State.
You have to get some hired guns here at guard to block some of these kids.
Yeah, get some ringers in there.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to the two final ones, both from the Big Ten. Ohio State linebacker Malik Harrison and Wisconsin linebacker Zach Bond.
Bond, I don't know anything about. He's the quarterback turned linebacker.
Quarterback turned outside linebacker in their 3-4.
Just like that kid in North Carolina, the Surratt kid.
Yeah, but he's now, because he's 6'2", 227, he's not going to be an outside. He's not going to be an edge player, so he's going to shift inside. So you're talking about another projection.
I haven't watched a whole lot of Wisconsin this year. We didn't do them in person at all with my ESPN crew. So I'll have to study his tape. I might do his tape and Nick Harris's this afternoon.
Okay.
But Malik Harrison, huge linebacker. This kid's 250. He's 6'3", 250. He is a monster looking off the ball linebacker. Reminds me a lot of DJ Williams coming out of University of Miami. Played some good football for the Denver Broncos, who was similar size, about 6'3", 250 as well, but he ran 4.55. Really interested to see how he's going to test.
That's going to be big for him.
He doesn't look like someone that's going to test well, but everything I'm hearing behind the scenes is he's actually a freak athlete. You just don't always see it on tape.
I watch him, and I don't think he's a bad athlete. Like, I watch him, there were guys, I remember watching TJ Edwards last year at Wisconsin and thinking, all right, athleticism and time speed, that's going to be an issue. I watched this kid and was like, all right, he's not as athletic as, I always make this comparison. He's not as athletic as Fred Warner. Mm-hmm. But, maybe the tier below? I saw at worst, I saw a solid athlete, a guy that's not going to be a liability.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe I'm just that much more enamored with his physical style and his finish.
Yeah, right.
And I'm not so enamored with how he got there. I'm like, whoa, look at him finish that ball carry. And I'm suddenly putting the movement patterns and getting in position I'm not as excited about. So that could just be a subtlety of his play and that he's really kind of drawn attention with his size, his finish, his physicality. And he's just kind of a ho-hum, gliding on that second level. You don't realize this kid at 6'3", 250 is a really good mover.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting group there. All right, well, Ben, appreciate the time here as always on Saturday Scouting. This was a fun discussion. Going to preview the college football playoff, but we will talk to you next week. I think next week is the big one. I think next week is the Ben Fennell All-America team.
Ooh,
so
love it.
You got some homework to do over the next few days. But we'll see you next week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast. Well, great stuff there from Ben. And as always, you can follow him on Twitter at @BenFennell_NFL. Does a great job helping us throughout the course of the football season. Helps me immensely with our Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, with Eagles Game Plan, which you can check out this week. Doug Peterson on the show, breaking down some film from the Eagles' overtime win last week against the New York Giants. So you can make sure to check that out on PhiladelphiaEagles.com or the Eagles YouTube page. So keep an eye out for that. Now, before we get to Dane Brugler and Mr. Relevant, just a quick reminder, if you want to if you like this podcast, if you listen every week, and if you haven't yet, just go and wherever you listen, leave us a little rating, leave us a comment. If you leave a question, we will answer it on the show each and every time. So if you like the show, best way to throw us your support is just go on, leave us a rating and leave us a comment, and we will answer any question that you ask here on the program. All right, now let's get to the next part. One of my favorite people to talk with every single time we get him on. That's Dane Brugler from The Athletic. Let's talk now about his top 10 positional previews here for the 2020 draft.
It's time for Mr. Relevant.
Well, fired up to welcome back to the show our friend Dane Brugler. You could follow him on Twitter at DP Brugler. He does an outstanding job covering the NFL draft for The Athletic and the best there is in the business. Dane, welcome back to the show, my man.
Thanks, Fran. Hard to believe we're in the bowl season already.
I know.
The regular season's over, and now it's on to bowl season. Before we know it, it'll be All-Star circuit, then the Combine, and the draft will be here. So it's crazy how quick it's moving.
Well, I'll be seeing you in person here in a few weeks when we get down to St. Pete and to Mobile and the All-Star circuit. But let's get to some break. I don't want to say some breaking news, but hot off the presses. Today, you put out your top 10 positional rankings as we sit here in early December. And I thought, you know what? Let's have Dane on, talk through these rankings, and just kind of talk through some of the top players at each position. And I don't want to give away too many of the rankings because I want people to go and read your work over at The Athletic. So if you don't already have a subscription, make sure you go check out this article. It's outstanding information. You've got some nuggets on some of the players at each position. So make sure you go check it out. But I wanted to ask you just about a couple players here and there. We'll start at quarterback where I think you and I have talked about this a little bit before, but with the Jordan Love news of him declaring for the NFL draft last night, the quarterback out of Utah State, I know you and I are on the same page with this kid and, you know, his talent and his upside. Obviously, that did not reach that upside this year with all the new supporting staff there, or the support system there with Utah State, but you have him ranked ahead of Justin Herbert. Do you feel that that is something that is shared with a lot of people around the league, or do you feel like you're in the minority on that side?
I think that Jordan Love and in some ways Justin Herbert, their evaluations are just starting because so much will depend on the pre-draft process. Senior Bowl, Jordan Love is graduating this month, so he will have that Senior Bowl invite. Hopefully he does accept because he could really benefit from that week down in Mobile, practices and all that. His arm should play very well down there. And Justin Herbert as well. I get it. He's a 4-year starter. We have plenty of tape on him, but the opportunity to go to Mobile and show what he can do could really benefit him as well. So this, from the outside looking in, we can watch the tape. We can see what they do well, but so much of the quarterback position is mental processing and just getting a sense of where these kids are mentally. And that's where, the Senior Bowl, the Combine, things like that really come into play for quarterbacks. So in a large sense, with Jordan Love, his evaluation is just starting because how he performs at the Senior Bowl, at the Combine, during workouts, during interviews, during meetings with teams, that's really going to determine where he is drafted. He could absolutely be a first-round pick, be the second or third quarterback drafted. That is possible after Joe Burrow, and who knows with Tua with the injury stuff. Yep. But all the raw talent is there, and we know teams are willing to bet on raw talent. And so, I think that Twitter and a lot of people on the outside are going to view Jordan Love similar to how they viewed Josh Allen. Not a lot of people love Josh Allen for a lot of different reasons. They have some similar parallels coming from the Mountain West and all that. But they're also different types of players as well. So it's really going to be interesting. Right now, Jordan Love, my number 3 quarterback, but that could change based off of how he does at the Senior Bowl and throughout the process.
Yeah, I like the comparison a lot. I would say that when you look at those two, the biggest difference is, when you look at Love, his accuracy and ball placement is just so consistent, whereas Allen, and I liked Allen a lot at Wyoming, he had those misses that Love, at least based off what I watched in 2018, did not have those. I'm excited to kind of dig more into the tape from this year and see what this kid put together as a junior. But let's get over to the running back spot because to me, I look at this class, and it's going to be a very strong group of running backs. I just wonder, and I know you've talked about this before, about how many of these guys are going to go in the first round. And just looking at your rankings, you look at DeAndre Swift from Georgia. You look at Jonathan Taylor from Wisconsin. You throw in J.K. Dobbins from Ohio State, Travis Etienne from Clemson. How many of these guys do you think go in round 1 when it's all said and done?
It's a great question, and I don't know because, and I did my first mock draft last week. You can find that up on The Athletic. And when I'm doing that exercise, I found myself really struggling where to put some of these running backs because I think there's a good chance we don't see a running back in the top 20. Maybe we do. I mean, never know. But there's a good chance we don't. And then so one of these playoff teams, and there's always trades and, teams move around. But it's just hard to find those obvious landing spots. I had one running back going in my first round mock, and that was Jonathan Taylor of Wisconsin going to the Miami Dolphins. I love the fit there with Brian Flores and what he's building and what Jonathan Taylor would mean to that offense, regardless of who's that quarterback. But, I hated leaving out DeAndre Swift from that mix. And, I think J.K. Dobbins, with the way he's played this year, has worked himself into being a top 40 prospect, potentially knocking on that first round door because he's such a special runner when it comes to play design, when it comes to vision, his understanding of timing to hit the hole, clear the hole, and then make a play at the second level. So, and then Travis Etienne has been remarkable this year. Just, I think he's almost a better athlete than he is a true running back. And that won't be for everybody. But, I was tempted to give the Ravens at, pick 31 or 32, Travis Etienne, just a strength of make their strength an even better strength for them, adding him to that backfield. But, it's going to be interesting. Like you said, it's going to be a strong group of running backs. And if you don't get your running back in the first round, you feel pretty good about Zach Moss or Hubbard from Oklahoma State or Edwards-Helaire, what he's done at LSU. He has 50 catches this year, while he was also averaging 6.5 yards per carry in the SEC, leads the conference in touchdowns. So, it's something that if you don't get your running back early, you feel good about your options on day two. And it's just a really strong group if all these juniors declare.
Yeah, I feel like when you look at the two guys at the top, then I think most of these guys, or most people would say that these are the top two guys, are Swift and Taylor. It's almost going to kind of be whatever you really need offensively. If you need that foundation back, if you're the Miami Dolphins and you don't have that presence in the backfield, you may go more towards Taylor. If you're a team that, hey, you've got an early downs runner, but you really need more dynamic presence back there, you need some speed in the backfield, DeAndre Swift you may value higher than a Taylor. I think it's going to be very interesting to see which of those two guys ends up going off the board first, because both are really good talents. I would throw in some of these other guys as well that we've talked about, whether it's Etienne, even an Ino Benjamin who just declared earlier today as well. But a really, really strong group of running backs. Let's go to the wide receiver class. And Eagles fans obviously want to know as much as they can about this group of wide receivers. And I think that it was really interesting. Number one, in your mock draft last week, you had the Eagles selecting Henry Ruggs over Jerry Jeudy, but you also have Henry Ruggs ahead of Jerry Jeudy in your rankings. Do you feel that this is something kind of consistent with what you're hearing from around the league, or is this a personal favorite of yours?
I think both. I mean, there's I think Jerry Jeudy was propped up as this can't miss top 5 pick for so long. And, Jerry Jeudy, I like a lot. I think he's a really, really good player. But I just think that he was kind of damaged a little bit with that perception. And, he might not go in the top 10. I think that's certainly possible to see him off the board somewhere in the 11 to 20 area. And he might not be the first receiver from his own team drafted. And, it depends on what you're looking for. We talk so much about these receivers. It depends on the makeup of your team and, what you're looking for, because there's different types of receivers, obviously, outside, inside, different strengths. If you're looking for the route runner, that's Jerry Jeudy. But, he's 190 pounds. He's, more drops this season than you want to see. If you're looking for more of the speed guy, that's Henry Ruggs, has the competitive makeup that you want. But then you also have, a guy like CeeDee Lamb in the mix, Laviska Shenault, T. Higgins. There's a lot of receivers in this mix. I don't think we're going to have a consensus number one top wide receiver. From team to team, they're going to point to different strengths on that roster and say, well, you know what, we really like this guy, but Henry Ruggs fits us better, or this player or that player. So, I think it really just comes down to preference, and we're splitting hairs with these guys based off of what we're looking for. Doing rankings on the outside, it's in a vacuum where we're just trying to do the best talents. But when you get into an NFL war room and you have a roster already in place and you're looking for a specific skill set or style of receiver, that's where things change.
And you also mentioned the other Alabama receiver in that article, and you wrote a little bit about Devontae Smith. And one of the things you wrote about him was the more you watch Devontae Smith, the more you run out of reasons why he shouldn't be considered in round one. So we're talking about 3 potential Alabama receivers in the first round of this draft. Talk about Smith and what grades him ahead of some of these other talented receivers in this class.
When you watch the receiver position as an evaluator, it boils down to 2 things. Can you get open? Can you catch the football? And that's what Devontae Smith does exceptionally well. He's able to beat press coverage. He can create his own spacing down the field, and he has the best ball skills on that Alabama roster with all those talented wide receivers. So, yes, he has a frail-looking frame. He might not even hit 180 at the combine in terms of his weight. And so there are things about him with the play strength and things like that you worry about at the next level, facing press coverage and all that. But again, for a guy with the ability to get open, to separate, and then those ball skills, you're going to bet on those traits. And so it's such a loaded position. I think Brandon Ayuk from Arizona State, I hated leaving him off my first round mock. I think he's absolutely in that first round conversation as the top senior wideout this year. And we could go on and on about the number of receivers. It's just such a loaded position.
Yeah, it's a really, really fun group from top to bottom in this class so far. Let's go over to the defensive side. And one name that stood out to me looking at your edge rushers was Penn State's Yetur Gross-Matos. I wanted to ask you about it. You had him at number 3 on your list for defense or for edge rushers, ahead of guys like a Terrell Lewis or a Julian Aquara or some of these other talented guys off the edge, Jonathan Grenard from Florida. What is it that stands out to you about Gross-Matos and how he could potentially transition to the NFL?
Well, I think he's become a better run defender, and he's not just a guy that's going to scream off the edge and, either he makes it or he wins the corner or he doesn't. I think he's becoming a more well-rounded player with, using those long, flexible strides to retrace his steps and find the football and make plays on the ball. So, yes, he does have that edge quickness where he can capture the corner, flatten, and put pressure on the quarterback. But he can also move around that defensive line, make plays against the run. He can, drop his hips, redirect, chase down from the backside if needed, whatever it takes. And still developing the hand use, but there's a lot of skills there that, as a coach, I want to work with. I want to get him in my building and see what we can make out of him.
Yeah, and then you stay on the defensive line there. And one of the rankings that really kind of caught me off guard was you had Nelville Gallimore, the defensive tackle from Oklahoma, a player that really intrigues me, a player we've talked about on this podcast numerous times, ahead of Raekwon Davis, the defensive lineman from Alabama. What's the thought with that in terms of how those two compare and contrast?
I'm not a big Raekwon Davis guy. I believe you are. And so that might be – every year there's one or two guys that you and I, we differ on. And this year, Raekwon Davis might be that guy. I mean, I think we both really like Gallimore. He's going to test exceptionally well. We know that. It doesn't always show on the tape, but when it does, it's beautiful. It's great to watch. Powerful hands, the quickness. He can reset the line of scrimmage with that upper body power that he has. So I think there's more to work with there. With Raekwon Davis, I think he's just a guy who is, he won the DNA lottery with just the natural size, 6'6", 315. He doesn't play as long as you would expect for a player with those measurables. And I think the highlights are nice. I mean, I think there are times where he will make some big impact plays against the run. But there's just too many times where he's consistently being blocked by a single player. I don't know. I expect more out of him. I think that he has a chance to be I don't think he's a first-round player. I think he could be a top 50 guy. But I'm just not in love with Raekwon Davis. I think there are other players I'd rather have before I take a chance on a player like that and him playing up to his level or the expectations when everything's just going to get faster and harder at the NFL level.
Yeah, I think with Davis, it's going to be kind of that interesting discussion is, all right, well, is he greater than the sum of his parts? What is ultimately like, you've got the length, you've got the athleticism, you've got the strength, there's power there. How has he not been able to put it all together? Or is he a guy that you're going to say, look, he's got the ability to be a more productive pro because you look at the upside. It's going to be a very interesting discussion that all teams are going to be having because I think he's got the ability to fit into any scheme. I've made the comparison in the past to guys like DeForest Buckner. There aren't a lot of players that walk on planet Earth that have that body type, that move like this kid, that can move people like this kid. It's going to be very, very interesting to see number one, how he performs down in Mobile. I think he's got as much to help or as much to earn down there at the Senior Bowl as anybody. It's going to be very interesting to kind of follow him throughout the course of this pre-draft process. Last one for you. All right, so I want to look at the corner spot, and a lot of corner to me is we all talk about how great this receiver class is, the top of the class, a quarterback. We talk about running back. This corner group is really, really fascinating, and I think when you look at this group, how they all kind of shake out, it's going to be interesting. I think everybody's going to have different rankings. What I wanted to ask you about in particular, two guys with kind of similar body types. Christian Fulton from LSU at number 4. C.J. Henderson, the junior who declared for the draft officially from Florida at number 5. How do you compare and contrast those two guys?
Yeah, with Fulton, I think he's kind of had a quietly had a nice year. And I say quietly because Stingley, the true freshman, with as well as he's played, has received so much attention. But Fulton has been that steady senior on the other side. A guy that I think he does a nice job at the start of the play. He can play press. He doesn't make excess contact, but he still finds a way to let the receiver know that it's going to be bump and run, and he's going to be in his hip pocket down the field. I think he needs to become a better tackler. That's kind of my big thing with him. I think the instincts are there, the toughness is there, but I just want to see him become a better tackler, and that's one of the things that maybe keeping him from being a versatile guy who can kick inside if needed. I want a better run defender if I'm going to play him in the nickel. But I think he is a guy that there's a lot to like there. And I think similar C.J. Henderson, who he might be the best just true press man corner in the draft, because when you just look at him, he has the measurables, 6'1", 200 pounds. He's going to run somewhere in the low 4.4s, good length. And he's really good for, about 85% of the play. But I want to see more playmaking skills at the catch point. He's not a great tackler. We know that. Part of it is technique, part of it's want to. But as a corner, the reason I don't have him higher than 5 is I just want to see better ball skills. I want to see him make better plays on the football. And some of it's timing, some of it's just, being in the right position. Being a great athlete is awesome. Having the size and the length is awesome. But, you just need to have those playmaking instincts to, it could be the difference between a completion and an incompletion, or the difference between an incompletion and an interception. And those plays matter throughout the course of a game. And so for C.J. Henderson, that's kind of my hang up with him. But he's a terrific athlete with a lot going for him.
If you want to check out all of these top 10 lists, make sure you go check out, you can see them on Dane's Twitter feed at DP Brugler, but go subscribe to The Athletic, check out Dane's top 10 lists for all the positions for this 2020 NFL Draft. Dane, appreciate the time here, as always, on the Journey to the Draft podcast driven by AAA. We'll catch up with you here in a few weeks, my friend. We'll see you soon.
All right, see you soon. Thanks, Fran.
Outstanding stuff there from Dane, as usual. You can follow him on Twitter at DP Brugler. If you listen to this show, I'm sure you already follow Dane. He's one of the best to do it and when it comes to covering college football and the NFL draft. Really love having him on whenever we get a chance. All right, before we move on here to Draft Buzz with Tony Pauline, just a quick reminder. If you enjoy football, if you enjoy X's and O's, if you're an Eagles fan, my guess is most of you already listen to the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade, but just in case you don't, hey, we had a great conversation this week with Greg Cosell, breaking down the Eagles' overtime win last week against New York, previewing this weekend's matchup against Washington, over on the Eagle Eye in the Sky podcast, fueled by Gatorade. You can find that wherever podcasts can be found. All right, let's now transition to our next segment. It's time for Draft Buzz with Tony Pauline.
Now it's time for Draft Buzz.
Excited to welcome back to the show our good friend Tony Pauline from the Pro Football Network. Tony, let's jump right in. We've got Draft Buzz here at the top, and I want to ask you about the decision with Jordan Love, the quarterback from Utah State, declared for the draft. We talked about him a little bit earlier in the show as well. You have been at the forefront of his decision-making process. There was the possibility that he could transfer, go to another school, because he's graduating this month, and play next year for a different team. But he ultimately decides to enter the 2020 NFL draft. Does that decision surprise you? Do you think that he could have waited a little bit longer, acquired a little bit more information before making the jump?
I would have waited, and I would have given him the suggestion, the recommendation to wait. But I had reported all along he was basically set to enter the NFL draft. I thought he should have waited, got more opinions, taken his time. There's no urgency to make a decision right now the way he did. Now are they going to play? Is he going to play in a bowl game? If Utah State is even in the bowl game this year, I believe they are. We'll have to wait and see there. But the overriding factor is, it's funny when you look at Jordan Love, his season this year kind of parallels what we saw from Josh Allen during his junior year at Wyoming. I mean, a lot of high expectations. People were very excited to see him play. And more times than not, he fell flat. But then again, as we saw Josh Allen, he entered the draft, became a top 10 pick, has been a relatively successful starting quarterback in the NFL, likely going to lead the Buffalo Bills to the playoffs this year. So I understand where Jordan Love is coming from. I would have told him, just get some opinions, take your time, take a deep breath. But I mean, it shouldn't come as a surprise. As I reported back in October, from what I was hearing, he had representation already set up, and he was ready to go into the NFL, make the jump.
Yeah, he's a guy, we've talked about him a lot over going back to the summer. He's got every trait from a physical standpoint. I mean, it's not just, look, he's a big kid who can throw it a mile. He's got outstanding accuracy, outstanding touch. His ball placement is phenomenal at all three levels of the field. He was just so impressive watching him on film last year as a sophomore. We've talked about so much about the turnover. The coaching staff leaves, the top receivers leave, the top running backs, the top offensive linemen. I mean, he lost so much of that supporting cast from a year ago, and that resulted in 17 touchdowns to 16 interceptions this year, which that's obviously not an ideal number when you're talking about touchdown to interception ratio, and just overall production was just not what he would have wanted. But I think when you look at the film, you could see a guy that's got all the traits. It's going to be a very fascinating case study just in terms of studying him going into this NFL draft and seeing how high he goes. We will, I'm sure, see him next month at the Senior Bowl down in Mobile.
And you could tell from that very first game against Wake Forest that he was pressing. He was trying to take too much on his shoulders because of what you mentioned, the graduation and the defection of so many talented, skilled players and some of the offensive linemen to the NFL. So you could tell right there he was just trying to do a little bit too much, sort of a similar way with Josh Allen. I go back to Josh Allen, his junior year at Wyoming. It was a similar sort of situation. And I think what you really got to do to properly evaluate Jordan Love is you just can't base it on this year. You got to go back and you got to look at that sophomore film. You got to look at the film from 2018, as you mentioned.
Yeah, he's going to be a very interesting case study, like I said. All right, let's get into some of these other guys who have declared for the draft, because we've got some other official announcements that have come forth. One player we talked about last week, with the firing of Steve Adazio at Boston College, the promotion for A.J. Dillon. He's jumping from college to the NFL, the running back for BC. What are the thoughts around the scouting community with A.J. Dillon? He's a guy I have not studied yet. I know he's been very productive for them, a big back, some pretty eye-popping numbers from a time speed standpoint from what has been reported. So I'm interested to see how he tests in February. But this is a guy I have not studied. I'm interested to get your thoughts.
15, 20 years ago, A.J. Dillon is a top 45 pick if he's not a first-round pick. But I think these days he's a last day pick because he's basically a one-dimensional downhill between the tackles type of runner. He's not a bad receiver out of the backfield, but he's not a great receiver. He's a grinded out type of guy that's a great short yardage runner. He's got solid speed for his size, but you got to keep him in between the tackles. He struggles getting around the corner. He really shows no ability around the perimeter. He's got limited versatility. Now, there is a spot for a player like A.J. Dillon at the next level. And if you basically design your offense, he's a guy who could potentially start. But I just don't think he's a top 100 pick in the NFL draft, and that's what scouts are telling me.
Tony, back in, I want to say it was late September, maybe early October, one of the first underclassmen declaration, one of the first reports that we saw was you coming on this podcast and talking about UCF wide receiver Gabe Davis and how he was very likely to enter the 2020 draft. Their season ends. He does exactly that. He decided to throw his name into the draft class. What are people saying about Gabe Davis, the tall but explosive wide receiver from UCF?
Yeah, no surprise here. In fact, if you go back to August, one of our first podcasts when we were talking about the American Athletic Conference, I said that Davis, at that time I graded him as a second-round pick, was my number one prospect from that conference. I think what Gabe Davis is, he's an incredible receiver. I mean, he is a game-changing, game-controlling receiver. The numbers aren't gaudy, but that's primarily because Central Florida oftentimes was so far ahead of the opponents going into the second half. They didn't need Gabe Davis. But I would recommend anybody go back and watch that Stanford film. Everyone talks about Stanford cornerback Paulson Adebo. I mean, Gabe Davis beat Paulson Adebo like a drum. I mean, it was sad what he did to him. I think the bottom line with Gabe Davis, I recently did a mock draft over at Pro Football Network about a month ago. I had Gabe Davis sliding into the late part of round one. That tells you my affection for him. But I think the reality is the faster he runs, the higher he's going to be drafted. I don't know that he's faster than the guy who's going to run 4.52, 4.53, which probably means you're looking at the early part of round two. But if he pops off some good 40 times, if he pops off some good shuttle times, I think with his size, with his speed, with his just incredible pass catching skill, you watch this guy on film, he plays with great balance and body control. He gets up, he wins out for the contested throws. He keeps the play in bounds running after the catch. It's just a matter of, how high are teams going to draft a guy like that who maybe runs 4.52, 4.53 in the 40?
Yeah, he's a guy, watching him on film reminded me a lot of Dante Moncrief coming out of Ole Miss, with that size-speed combination. And I know Moncrief, he turned into a bit of a journeyman in the NFL and hasn't really worked out, but I'm talking about him coming out of Ole Miss was a very, very intriguing prospect. I think Gabe Davis has a lot of similar traits. All right, let's talk about another receiver that you've discussed a lot on this show, and that's Oregon State wideout Isaiah Hodgins. He will be entering, it looks like, the NFL draft. What are your thoughts on Hodgins, and what are people saying about him around the draft community?
Hodgins is going to be being overrated right now by people on the outside, people on the internet. They talk about him as a top 45 pick. You talk to scouts, they say he's a fifth or sixth round choice. He's a terrific receiver. He's got outstanding length. He catches the ball very well. He's a terrific red zone target. But the fact is he's not fast. He's not quick. You'll watch the film. He struggles releasing off the line of scrimmage. He's one of those bigger receivers, taller receivers that wins out on the college level because he's so much bigger than everyone else. But that does not project all that well to the next level. I talked with a couple of people who say that they think he's going to run in the 4.6s or he's a 4.6 type of guy during the combine. I talked to someone who was at a game earlier this year where they watched Hodgins and they said, you know what, you're going to have to put 20 pounds on him and turn him into a move tight end because this guy can't run. And I think that's the situation with Hodgins. I think he's a guy who's going to run in the high 4.5s, low 4.6s. I think he's a day 3 guy. I like him as a pass catcher. He's a good receiver. He's just not a great athlete. And again, going back to A.J. Dillon, there's a place for a guy like Isaiah Hodgins in the NFL. There's just not a place for that type of guy in the first 3 or 4 rounds of the NFL draft.
Well, let's stay in the Pac-12 because another guy that a lot of people were excited about in terms of his decision to enter this draft is Washington tight end Hunter Bryant. We talked about him last week as about a possibility to enter the draft with Chris Peterson stepping down as head coach. He follows through and enters this class.
Yeah, basically a contrasting style to Drew Sample, the Washington Husky tight end that was taken in the second round by the Cincinnati Bengals, where Sample was your bigger-bodied blocking tight end who was also a good pass catcher. Hunter Bryant is basically a big receiver in a tight end's body. I mean, he gets down the field. He catches the ball very well. He's very athletic. He's more of your move tight end. He's a guy that you're not really going to rely on to block, although it's not because of lack of effort. He just doesn't have the blocking strength. With the poor class of tight ends or the poor crop of tight ends that will be available in the 2020 NFL draft, if Hunter Bryant turns in a few good pre-draft workouts, I could absolutely see him securing a spot during the second day of the draft, possibly in the second round.
Yeah, he's a player that's really, really athletic, really fun to watch. Excited to do more work on him. I did watch him a little bit over the summer. All right, let's get to another player, a guy that's been mocked often to the Eagles throughout this season, and that's Florida cornerback C.J. Henderson, a guy that I've watched on film and was really, really intrigued by over the summer. I think he's got all the physical traits. He made it official. He's leaving Gainesville, now entering the NFL. What are people saying about C.J. Henderson? Because it seems like the internet, the people in the media are a little bit all over the place. Some people see him as a first-round pick. Some people not so much. They question the tackling. What are people in the league saying?
Tackling and the ability to make plays with his back to the ball. I mean, it's basically he's going to have to refine his game. He's very rough around the edges. Like you said, he's a tremendous athlete. He's got all the physical skills to be a number 2 cornerback, if not a number 1 cornerback in the league, to be a starter, basically. But he's got to refine some of his techniques. And I think what's going to happen is he could be the second or third cornerback taken off the draft, depending on who else enters, in large part because it kind of falls off. It kind of really falls off the cliff after Jeff Okudah of Ohio State. I think he's going to be a top 32 pick. I think he's going to run very well. But again, I think he's a guy that there may be, from what I'm hearing, is they expect some bumps in the road early in his NFL career until he kind of finally pulls the pieces together.
Yeah, he's a really, really intriguing player. Excited to watch more from this season as well. But let's get to another SEC corner. Another guy that you were all over. You talked about Mississippi State cornerback Cameron Dantzler and his possibility of entering the draft. You reported that over a month ago. Now he makes it official and will leave the Bulldogs and is going to the pros.
Here is a guy in Dantzler that kind of flew under the radar screens, but there were some scouts who over the summer gave Dantzler a mid-first round choice. That's how highly he's thought of in the scouting community. He's got the size, he's got the speed, he's got the ball skills. Want to see how he tests. But there were a lot of people in the scouting community excited about Dantzler. He's got a few things he's got to work on in his game. It's kind of tough to scout him at times because opposing quarterbacks purposely stayed away from him and were not throwing in his direction. But I can tell you, he was highly thought of in the scouting community before the season even began.
Yeah, Mississippi State has a pretty good track record of putting defensive backs into the NFL. Guys have had a lot of success. Darius Slay, certainly at the top of that list in terms of recent history. All right, let's get into now what we saw this past weekend. It was championship weekend in college football. I want to know whose stock is on the rise based off the games that you saw from Friday and Saturday.
I got to say the 4 senior offensive linemen from the University of Oregon. You know, when everyone talks about the University of Oregon and the draft, the conversation immediately goes to Justin Herbert. But those 4 offensive linemen, they have a 5th one who's a true sophomore who's going to be a very early pick when he's draft eligible. Shane Lemieux, the 5th-year senior, the guard, Jake Hansen, the center, another 5th-year senior, Calvin Throckmorton, the right tackle, another 5th-year season, and Dallas Warmack, the Alabama transfer. Those guys were sensational against a very talented Utah defensive line that has at least 2 top 100 picks. I mean, they controlled that game. And this was normal for them throughout the season because if you watched Oregon, you know, we talked about Justin Herbert and how he played uninspired football and didn't look great. But Oregon was consistently rushing the ball for 200-plus yards in every game against good opponents, against the USCs. And they really just dominated that Utah defense and that Utah front line. All 4 of those guys, Lemieux, Hansen, Warmack, Throckmorton, they're not going to be early picks. They're probably going to be last day picks. But these are guys who are going to be on NFL rosters. Some of them are going to be starters. Some of them will be backups, will add depth. They're all going to be on NFL rosters next September in some form or another. So I think really the Oregon offensive line, which has fallen under the radar screen, who has played well all season, really stood out against Utah and just pushed that Utah defense at times up and down the field.
Yeah, there was a reason I gave him my game ball earlier in the show. That group was really, really impressive. Give a nod to that coaching staff as well, to the game that they called on Friday night against Utah. All right, let's fast forward now to this week's action. And the only FBS game this week is Army-Navy right here in Philadelphia, College Game Day in town for this matchup, a legendary one each and every year. But there's plenty to talk about from an NFL draft standpoint when you're looking at the FCS playoffs, the Division II playoffs. Where's some players that if you want to get your football fix this Saturday that you may want to try and turn the channel and check out this week from an NFL draft standpoint?
I'm going to talk about 2 players. The first one is actually on ESPN2 Friday night when James Madison takes on Northern Iowa. And this is a quarterback that I've mentioned on this podcast before, Ben DiNucci from James Madison, a transfer from Pittsburgh. Here's a guy who wasn't even graded by scouts coming into the season. He's thrown for 80. He's completed 80% of his passes or better the past 4 games. 24 TDs to just 4 interceptions this year. I mean, he's averaging close to 75, completing close to 75% of his passes for just under 300 yards. He's smart. He's tough. He has a decent arm. He doesn't have a great arm. He's more than a game manager. He's a guy who can make plays. And again, I go back to the fact that DiNucci was a guy who was not even graded by scouts coming into the year. And now there's talk that he could hop into the late rounds of the draft, which is pretty significant.
All right, Tony, so you've talked about DiNucci in the past. Is there another guy that you also will be keeping your eye on this weekend?
You know, Slippery Rock State plays Minnesota State in the Division II finals this weekend. Hopefully that game finds its way onto television. Slippery Rock State also has a quarterback that people have to keep an eye on, that a guy that's starting to get mentioned in the scouting community. Roland Rivers, a Valdosta State transfer who's now playing for Slippery Rock State. I mean, look at this guy's numbers this year. 50 touchdown passes, 4,261 yards, just 6 interceptions, is completing consistently 60 to 65% of his throws. It's Division II football. But this guy, again, like DiNucci, wasn't even graded by scouts coming into the year. He's playing lights out. He's got outstanding size. He goes about 6'2", 220, 225 pounds. He's someone that when Slippery Rock State has their pro day, you know, scouts usually wouldn't have gone through there, but now you're going to get a ton of scouts to go through there to watch Roland Rivers. I don't know if he gets drafted, but he's absolutely built a buzz about himself in the scouting community. People are very interested in watching him play. Hopefully we'll see him in a postseason game. I don't know if it's going to be a Shrine game. Maybe he's out in the NFLPA game, but he's definitely somebody. Roland Rivers, the quarterback from Slippery Rock State, they play Minnesota State. If it's on TV, you got to tune in and watch this cat play.
Nobody else. I can't imagine there's another podcast that's talking about Roland Rivers from Slippery Rock. But, look, who expected Duck Hodges to turn into anything in the NFL? Now he's the starting quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers as they try and make a run to the playoffs as a rookie, which, coming for the level of competition he came from was certainly unexpected. But, Tony, appreciate the time as always here on the Journey to the Draft podcast driven by AAA. We will talk to you again next week.
Look forward to it.
Awesome stuff there from Tony, and we got a lot of information about some of these underclassmen who are entering the draft. And I mentioned at the top of the show, one name who just made himself eligible for this draft is Arizona State's running back, Ino Benjamin. He's our subject this week in our scouting report.
Dim those lights. We're headed to the film room for the scouting report.
All right, so Ino Benjamin, he's a guy that I studied a lot over the summer. I still have to do work from this season, but I thought, you know what? Topical name, just declared for the draft. He's going to be one of the top running backs in this class, especially a guy that not a lot of people are very familiar with. Since he plays out west, a lot of fans obviously not awake to be able to watch him play, playing for Herm Edwards out there. So I thought, you know what, let's cover him. These are my notes from his sophomore season, but I figured let's just go through them here on the show. He's now a 2-year starter for Rob Likens in that offense, lined up primarily in the shotgun next to the quarterback. A lot of 1 and 2 back sets, though. We'll get some runs from the pistol, quarterback under center. They do a good job of mixing things up from both a gap and zone run scheme standpoint. He's got pretty good height and weight for the position. Looks pretty well built overall in his lower half. Excited to get a look at him up close and in person at the Combine in February. His athleticism doesn't pop off the film, but this guy's really slippery. He's got good balance, stop, start, change of direction skills, and he moves very efficiently, both laterally and linearly. So straight ahead or side to side. This guy's is really, really efficient in his movement. He's got a bit of a second gear and that burst to pull away from a defender in a short area, and he's got just enough long speed to be able to bust off long runs out west in the Pac-12. Very decisive runner, doesn't typically dance in the backfield, did not have many negative runs. If there was, it was because there was early penetration against that Arizona State offensive line. This is a guy that is really decisive getting downhill. He's also a very fearless runner. He is not afraid to stick his head down and bowl through a crowd. Had a number of big runs open up for him just because he trusted the scheme, got downhill, and ran right off the backside of an offensive lineman. I love seeing that. He's a very tough, competitive runner. He's consistently running behind his pads, very tough to bring to the ground, and he was very effective in short yardage situations as a workhorse back in 2018 as a sophomore. He does a really good job running through contact thanks to his contact balance. Really, really impressive with his ability to stay upright and stay up. His contact balance is really, really good. He'll use a stiff arm. He'll spin off contact, find creative ways to pick up extra yardage. He was moved into the slot at times. I thought he was a really, really natural receiver. He's not a dynamic athlete, but a guy that catches the ball really, really well and should be a really solid receiver in the NFL. Very confident hands from the running back spot. He doesn't have, from a negative standpoint, he doesn't have that instant speed, that explosiveness that he's going to bust off big runs. I said he's not super dynamic. He did fumble twice in 6 games that I studied last year, so interested to see how his ball security has improved going into his junior season. And then ultimately, on third down, can he improve a little bit as a blocker? I thought he showed some flashes there. Really good cut player, but can he take on a blitzer and erase that guy, keep him away from the quarterback? That was something I wanted to see a little bit more consistently from him this year. Overall, I thought this was a guy that, coming off his sophomore film, he trusts what he saw. He could make people miss. He's got really impressive contact balance, and he's proven that he can carry the load as a feature back in an offense. Can he be that guy in the NFL? That's going to be the question I want to answer when I watch him in his junior season here, studying him on film. So honestly, on film, he reminded me of Kareem Hunt coming out of Toledo. I thought they shared a lot of the same traits. Kareem Hunt was not a dynamic athlete with Toledo, but he was a feature back, had really good vision and decisiveness, and his contact balance, his ability to run through contact and make people miss, really helped him to be very, very effective in the MAC. This kid has shown all those same traits in the Pac-12. So it's going to be a really, really fun study for me as I go through and watch his film from 2019. All right, let's wrap this show up now. We're going to answer a couple of your questions at home from Twitter in our draft mailbag.
Now it's time to hear from you, the fans, in the draft mailbag.
All right, well, as I mentioned at the top of the show, the best way to support this program, if you enjoy listening to this podcast every week, is to go onto Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify. Just go and leave us a rating and leave us a comment. If you leave a question, we'll answer it here in this segment. We've got a couple of questions here, this time from Twitter. We petitioned for some questions. We got 3 back that we really enjoyed, so here are the 2 of them here. Philly Studfeld. What safeties do you see being available when the Eagles pick? I think that's one position other than wide receiver that the Eagles may target. Could Grant Delpit be available? And I think, obviously, look, we don't know where the Eagles are going to be picking at this point. There's a lot of range of outcomes over these last 3 games. If the Eagles, they go 3-0, they're going to be picking in the 20s and in the mid-20s. If they go 1-2 or 2-1 and they lose the game against Dallas, they could be picking in the low teens. So that could definitely affect who's going to be on the board from a safety standpoint. I think the 2 names that you're really talking about are both underclassmen, so we don't know if they're going to enter, but that's Grant Delpit from LSU and Xavier McKinney from Alabama. Those seem to be the 2 big names. I studied Delpit over the summer. He is, to me, is the epitome of a post player. He's got sideline to sideline range, the ball skills to finish on the back end. He's got a little bit of a cornerback background. So from a coverage standpoint, everything's there. He's just an inconsistent tackler. That's going to be the one knock on him, or one of the big knocks on him coming out, is that he's got to be more consistent coming downhill and finishing one-on-one. That's going to be a big question with him moving forward. Xavier McKinney, I have not studied, but I will say this. Watching that Alabama secondary, Trevon Diggs and some of the other guys that they've got there on the back end, and just watching that team on TV, this kid is all over the place. He's used in the run game, or he plays close to the box in the run game. He'll play on the back end in coverage and seem to be very effective there. Also a great blitzer. So this is a guy that was used all over the field for Alabama in a lot of different ways. I'm excited to kind of put some time in to studying him if he were to declare for this draft. But certainly a player, we talked about him a little bit earlier as well, a guy that you want to be able to factor in when you're talking about the potential first or second round picks at the safety spot in this draft. All right, let's get to the next question, and that's from Jacob Hubler 25. Wide receiver, corner, or safety in the first round, who are ones that fit well? So we just talked about the safeties. I think for when you talk about wide receiver and corner, these are 2 of the best positions in this draft, and I think that lines up very, very well for this Eagles team. When you look at wide receiver, I mean, there are so many names, and we talk about them each and every week here on the show. But you look at that Alabama trio we talked about earlier in the show with Dane Brugler. You've got Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs and Devontae Smith. You've got Laviska Shenault, a big-bodied kid who can run out of Colorado. CeeDee Lamb from Oklahoma. You've got the Clemson group with T. Higgins. It's a dynamic. Or Jalen Reagor from TCU. The list goes on and on and on. There's a very, very good group of wide receivers in this class. So certainly no shortage of names there. Then you go over to cornerback. I think it's also a really, really good group. And a lot of it will depend on which underclassmen decide to come out. But, namely at the top, Ohio State corner Jeffrey Okudah is a big-bodied kid who can come down and strike a ball carrier, but also plays really good in coverage. I mean, he's instinctive. He's got the ability to play man or zone. He's athletic. He's a guy, certainly, to keep an eye on in the first round. Trevon Diggs is a personal favorite of mine from Alabama. Big-bodied kid who's got ball skills and will come downhill and challenge receivers as well. Really, really good in press coverage, a very competitive corner. Christian Fulton, more of an off-coverage player. We talked about him earlier with Ben. He's athletic. He can get in and out of breaks really, really well. He's got this long speed as well, but he's better a little bit off the ball in off coverage. It's a really good group of corners overall. C.J. Henderson from Florida, Jeffrey Gladney from TCU. This cornerback group, very, very, very intriguing. So a lot of players to cover from those 2 skill spots, but really good questions there from Philly Studfeld and Jacob Hubler. Really appreciate everybody, as always, for listening to this show. We will catch up with you next week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA. Do not want to miss next week's show. We've got Ben Fennell's All-American team. It's always a fun episode. So we'll see you next week here on the Journey to the Draft podcast, driven by AAA.